When I first moved into my new home, I thought I'd finally found the kind of peace I'd been looking for. It was a quiet neighborhood lined with large oak trees, manicured lawns, and winding sidewalks that glistened after every morning sprinkler run. It was the sort of place you'd expect to hear birds singing and see kids riding bikes in the evening. But that tranquility didn't last long once I met Karen. She lived 3 houses down, right at the bend of the street, and she carried herself like she was the queen of the neighborhood. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her head, she was the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA, not the president, not even on the board, but that didn't stop her from acting like she owned the entire block. It started subtly at first. I noticed footprints across my freshly mowed lawn one morning, not animal tracks, but shoe prints. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe a kid had taken a shortcut or a delivery person cut through. But it kept happening. Every morning, there were more. Eventually, I saw it with my own eyes, a couple from down the street casually strolling across my yard, heading toward the park behind the houses. When I stepped outside and asked them what they were doing, the woman smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, everyone does it. It's just faster to get to the walking trail. Everyone does it." That phrase annoyed me more than it should have. My lawn wasn't a public sidewalk, it was private property that I spent hours maintaining every week. I politely told her I'd appreciate it if she and the others could use the sidewalk instead. She gave me a dismissive laugh, muttered something about new neighbors not understanding how things work, and walked off. Over the next week, I started noticing a steady stream of people cutting across my yard: joggers, dog walkers, even kids on scooters. It was as if my property had suddenly become a shortcut highway. So, I went to the HOA office to ask about putting up a small private property please keep off the grass sign. The secretary behind the desk gave me an awkward smile and said, "You'll need approval from the landscaping committee for that." Apparently, even small signs required a bureaucratic process. A few days later, I received an email from the committee denying my request. Their reasoning: the sign would disrupt the uniform aesthetic of the neighborhood. In other words, they didn't want anything interfering with their perfectly curated lawns, even though mine was the one being trampled. That's when Karen showed up. She marched over to my door one morning while I was watering the flower beds. "You don't need to make such a fuss," she said, crossing her arms. "The trail behind your house has always been open for community use. Everyone cuts through." I told her there was no such thing as community use on my property and that my deed clearly marked the land boundaries. Her response: "You'll learn how the HOA works around here. We keep things convenient for everyone." Then she turned and walked straight across my lawn on her way out, as if to prove her point. My blood boiled. I tried reasoning again, even printed a few flyers explaining that crossing private property was trespassing. The next morning, I found them crumpled up and tossed near my mailbox. Then came the dogs, people letting them relieve themselves on my grass and not even picking up after them. One morning, I caught a teenager cutting across while dragging a bike tire through my flower bed. When I yelled, he shrugged and said, "Karen said it's fine." That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore, it was deliberate. I checked the property maps again just to be absolutely certain. My backyard extended several feet beyond where the HOA's green belt began. The area everyone used as a shortcut was legally mine. I even called the county assessor's office to confirm it. The records were clear, I owned every square inch. Armed with proof, I brought the documents to the next HOA meeting. The board members skimmed the papers, nodded, and said they'd look into it. But Karen, sitting smugly in the front row, said, You're making a big deal out of nothing. This neighborhood has always worked on mutual respect. Mutual respect, apparently, only went one way. That night, I stood on my porch looking at the faint path worn into the grass from constant foot traffic. I could see silhouettes of people still walking through, flashlights bobbing in the dark as if they owned the place. I knew I had to do something that would make it clear I wasn't bluffing about my property. I wasn't going to put up a fence, at least not yet. I wanted to send a message first, one they wouldn't forget. Karen thought she could bully me with Hoa talk and community traditions, but she was about to learn that I wasn't the type to roll over. Over the next few days, I began planning. I researched local laws, property rights, and what exactly I could do without breaking any ordinances. There were plenty of creative ways to handle trespassers legally. I found a few ideas that made me smile, harmless, but effective. I went to the hardware store and picked up supplies, motion-activated sprinklers, solar lights, and a few strategically placed cameras to document everything. I wanted evidence, both for my amusement and for any future disputes. When I started setting everything up one Saturday morning, Karen wandered over, hands on hips as usual. "What are you doing now?" she asked, squinting. "Just improving my lawn," I said with a grin. She frowned, muttered something about non-approved modifications, and stomped away. By the time I finished, the setup was perfect, invisible during the day but ready to activate the moment someone stepped foot where they shouldn't. That evening, I sat by the window, waiting. Right on cue, a couple walked through the yard just after dusk. The moment they hit the sensor, a jet of water shot out from the sprinkler, soaking them head to toe. The look of shock and outrage on their faces was priceless. I couldn't help but laugh. Within an hour, I heard Karen's angry voice echoing down the street, complaining about juvenile behavior. But the best part: the next morning, not a single footprint on my lawn. For the first time since moving in, my grass was untouched, perfectly smooth under the early sun. I knew Karen wouldn't give up that easily, she never did, but for now, the message had been sent loud and clear. My lawn wasn't her shortcut, and this wasn't her kingdom to rule. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The real surprise, the one she'd never forget, was still coming. After the sprinkler incident, things in the neighborhood got tense. For about a week, no one dared cross my lawn, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I had finally made my point. But then Karen came storming over one morning, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched dramatically on her head like she was stepping into a courtroom instead of standing in my driveway. She didn't bother with a greeting. "We need to talk about your little stunt," she said, glaring at me as though I'd committed some unpardonable crime. I calmly told her that if by stunt she meant protecting my private property, then yes, we could talk about it all day. Her lips tightened into a thin line. "You can't install unapproved water features. The Hoa has rules about that," she said. I told her the sprinklers weren't water features, they were pest deterrents. "Pests like nosy neighbors," I added, which earned me a sharp gasp and a furious turn of her heel as she stomped away. But Karen wasn't one to quit. She had that particular brand of stubbornness that feeds on defiance. A few days later, I noticed footprints again, this time muddy ones, deliberately stamped across my lawn, as if someone had intentionally dragged dirt just to make a point. Then, 2 nights later, I caught a shadow moving near my side fence on my security camera. Someone was trying to sneak through, probably testing if the sprinklers were still there. The motion sensors caught them immediately. The water burst out in a perfect arc, soaking whoever it was from head to toe. The figure screamed definitely Karen's voice and stumbled backward. I watched the footage twice just to make sure. It was her, all right. The next morning, I found a letter taped to my front door with the HOAS logo at the top. Cease and desist use of unauthorized irrigation systems, it read. Failure to comply may result in fines and further action. I laughed out loud. It was so ridiculous that I framed the letter and hung it in my garage as a reminder of how far Karen's pettiness could go. I wasn't going to back down, though. I wrote a formal response, citing the state's property laws that allowed me to install water deterrents within my boundaries. I even included screenshots of the trespassing footage. I dropped the letter off at the HOA office myself, right in front of Karen, who was clearly not expecting me to fight back with actual documentation. She tried to brush it off, saying, "You're making this neighborhood hostile." I told her I was just defending my land, something she and her followers might want to try respecting. From that point on, it became a cold war. The HOA started random inspections near my property line. Karen would walk around pretending to measure things with a tape measure or take photos of my fence like she was gathering evidence for a trial. Meanwhile, I kept upgrading my setup. I added another motion sensor that triggered bright floodlights at night and a gentle chime alert inside my house. Every time someone tried sneaking through, I'd know instantly. Then came the dogs again. People started walking them intentionally closer to my property. One evening, a guy let his dog relieve itself right on my edge of the lawn, and when I confronted him, he smirked and said, "Karen said you don't mind." I turned on my phone camera and said, "Karen doesn't live here?" "I do. So if you or your dog step here again, I'll report you for trespassing." That shut him up pretty quick. Still, I could feel the tension growing every day. People were choosing sides. Some neighbors quietly supported me, whispering that they were sick of the HOAS nonsense, while others, likely under Karen's influence, gave me dirty looks whenever I passed. One afternoon, while I was working in my garage, I heard loud laughter outside. I peeked out and saw Karen and two of her HOA friends standing on the sidewalk, staring at my yard. "See, he's turning it into a circus," one of them said. "Next thing you know, he'll build a moat," Karen replied, chuckling. I didn't say a word, just smiled and waved. What they didn't realize was that their mockery gave me an idea. Maybe I wouldn't build a moat, but there were other ways to remind them of boundaries: creative, harmless, but effective. That weekend, I spent the better part of a Saturday working on my new project. I went to the local hardware store and bought a few more motion-activated tools. I even installed a discrete speaker system near the edge of the yard, triggered by motion. It played a polite pre-recorded message every time someone stepped too close: "Private property, please use the sidewalk." It was calm, polite, and perfectly within my rights. When I tested it that night, I couldn't help but grin. It was subtle enough not to break any HOA rules, but it would definitely make intruders think twice. The first test came sooner than expected. Early the next morning, Karen, dressed in her jogging outfit, tried to cut across again. The second she crossed the sensor, my voice echoed across the yard: "Private property, please use the sidewalk." She froze like she'd seen a ghost, looked around frantically, then darted back to the sidewalk, glancing over her shoulder the whole time. I watched from my window, laughing so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The next day, I overheard her telling someone near the mailboxes that my house was bugged with surveillance. She wasn't entirely wrong, but I didn't feel bad about it. The funny thing was, after that, people actually started respecting my boundaries. The shortcut crowd disappeared, and even the Hoa patrols stopped hovering around. It was almost too quiet. Until one evening, about a week later, I came home to find something new in my mailbox, a notice of violation from the Hoa claiming that I had installed non-approved electronic devices visible from public view. I rolled my eyes. They were referring to the small solar panels that powered my sprinklers and sensors. This time, I didn't just send a response. I called the county zoning office. The official confirmed that everything I had installed was completely legal and that the Hoa had no authority to demand their removal. Armed with that, I sent another letter, this one addressed directly to Karen and the entire Hoa board with copies of the law attached. The following Hoa meeting was awkward, to say the least. I showed up, sat quietly in the back, and waited until they reached community property concerns on the agenda. Karen started speaking about a homeowner creating unnecessary hostility with surveillance equipment, and before she could finish, I stood up and said, "Are you referring to my property?" The room went silent. I held up the official county letter confirming my compliance with all regulations. The board members exchanged nervous glances, clearly realizing they had no ground to stand on. Karen tried to argue, but one of the board members cut her off and said, "He's right. There's nothing we can do." Karen's face turned a shade of red. I didn't think humanly possible. She gathered her papers, muttered something under her breath, and stormed out of the room. The meeting ended not long after. As I walked home, a few neighbors smiled and gave me a thumbs up. That night, for the first time since moving in, I slept soundly knowing that my property and my peace were finally mine again. Of course, I had a feeling Karen wasn't done with me. People like her rarely accept defeat quietly. But as I looked out the window at my pristine, untouched lawn, glowing softly under the porch light, I couldn't help but smile. Whatever she had planned next, I was ready. And if she thought sprinklers and a warning system were surprises, she clearly hadn't seen anything yet. Karen was quiet for almost 2 weeks after the Hoa meeting, which was unusual for her. Normally, she couldn't go 3 days without finding something to complain about: someone's mailbox paint, the height of a hedge, or a car parked an inch too far from the curb. Her silence felt strange, like the calm before a storm. I started to think she might have finally accepted defeat, that maybe the message had sunk in. But I should have known better. Karen didn't let go of grudges, she nurtured them. When she finally made her next move, it wasn't just petty, it was desperate. It began on a Sunday morning when I stepped outside to grab the newspaper. My lawn was littered with trash. Empty soda cans, chip bags, even an old shoe. Someone had clearly dumped a bag of garbage right in the middle of the grass. My first thought was that it might have been some teenagers pulling a prank, but when I checked my security footage, there she was, Karen, in her signature pink tracksuit, marching across my yard at 11:42 p.m. carrying a black trash bag. She didn't even try to hide it. She just dumped the whole thing and strutted away like she'd done the neighborhood a favor. I couldn't stop laughing. It was ridiculous, childish, and exactly what I'd expected from her. But instead of confronting her immediately, I decided to let the evidence build up. The next night, she did it again. This time she added a few broken branches and old newspapers to the pile, clearly trying to make it look like I didn't maintain my property. I took screenshots from the video and saved them in a folder labeled Karen Chronicles. By the third night, she brought back up another Hoa busybody, both of them sneaking around like teenagers in a bad heist movie. They didn't realize my new camera system had infrared night vision. Their faces were crystal clear. By now, my patience had completely evaporated. I could have gone straight to the police, but I wanted her to feel the sting of her own arrogance first. So I decided it was time for the surprise. I'd been planning something harmless, but unforgettable. I spent the next day at the hardware store gathering supplies, a few large motion-activated air horns, some weatherproof speakers, and a set of small, bright LED spotlights. I buried the air horns near the edge of the yard, wired to trigger if anyone stepped past a specific line. The lights would flash at the same time, turning the whole area into a makeshift alarm zone. It was completely legal, perfectly safe, and guaranteed to give any trespasser one unforgettable wake-up call. 2 nights later, Karen returned. I saw her on my camera feed just before midnight, creeping along the edge of my property, carrying another trash bag. She looked over her shoulder, clearly checking if anyone was watching. The moment she stepped onto the grass, the motion sensor clicked and the air horn exploded with a blaring sound that could have woken the entire block. The LED lights flashed bright white, illuminating her like a deer caught in headlights. She screamed so loud I could hear it from inside my house. She stumbled backward, dropped the bag, and fell straight into the sprinkler system I'd reactivated earlier that day. Water blasted her from both sides as she scrambled to her feet, shrieking and slipping in the mud before sprinting back toward the sidewalk, soaked and humiliated. I'll admit, I laughed harder than I had in years. The footage was priceless, every second of it captured in perfect HD. By morning, word had already spread. A couple of neighbors stopped me while I was washing my car just to say they'd heard the commotion. One of them winked and said, "Guess someone finally learned not to mess with you." Karen didn't show her face that day, but the Hoa group chat was buzzing. She apparently claimed I had set up dangerous traps on community property. That was my cue. I sent the entire neighborhood an email with time-stamped video proof showing her trespassing, dumping trash, and triggering the alarm on my private land. I also attached the Hoa's own property boundary map. Within an hour, the Hoa president replied, apologizing for the misunderstanding and assuring me that Karen's actions did not represent the board. I could practically taste the defeat in that message. But I wasn't done. I wanted this to end properly, not with gossip, but with accountability. So I filed a police report for trespassing and property damage, complete with video evidence. When the officer came by to take my statement, he actually chuckled after watching the footage. "Looks like she scared herself worse than anything else," he said, shaking his head. They didn't arrest her, of course, but she was served with a formal warning, and that was enough to make her life very uncomfortable for a while. I heard later that she tried to file a complaint against me for harassment by water and sound, but the police and Hoa both dismissed it. For the next few weeks, Karen avoided me completely. She wouldn't even make eye contact when I passed by. The only sign that she hadn't completely surrendered was the way she'd speed walk past my house, glancing nervously at the lawn as if it might jump up and bite her. It was poetic justice. But something interesting happened after that. The neighborhood started treating me differently. People who'd never said more than a polite hello before started stopping by to chat. One guy thanked me for standing up to the Hoa nonsense, saying Karen had bullied him for months about the color of his mailbox. Another family invited me over for a barbecue, saying they admired how I'd handled the situation with class and humor. Apparently, I'd become a bit of a local legend. Even the Hoa meetings changed. Karen stopped attending altogether, and the board became noticeably more lenient about minor violations. It was as if her downfall had loosened the grip of fear everyone had been under. Life went back to normal, actually, better than normal. My lawn stayed pristine, my sprinklers stayed off unless needed, and for the first time, I could enjoy sitting on my porch without worrying about someone trampling through. Then one afternoon, I saw Karen loading up her SUV with boxes. Her house had a for sale sign in the yard. She looked tired, defeated, and smaller somehow, like the fire that fueled her constant meddling had burned out. Our eyes met for a brief second as she closed the trunk. She didn't say anything, just got in her car and drove away. I didn't wave or smile, I just watched her go. After she left, the neighborhood felt lighter. People smiled more, talked more, laughed more. It was amazing how much one person's negativity could cast a shadow over an entire community. As the weeks passed, grass grew over the faint path that had once been trampled through my yard. The marks of her intrusion vanished, leaving nothing but a smooth, green surface and peace restored. I still have the video footage saved, though. Not out of spite, more as a reminder. A reminder that standing up for yourself doesn't always require shouting or fighting. Sometimes it just takes a bit of creativity, patience, and a willingness to let people hoist themselves with their own arrogance. Karen thought she could bully me into submission, that her Hoa authority made her untouchable. But in the end, she learned the hard way that when you push too far into someone else's space, both literally and figuratively, the consequences can be loud, wet, and unforgettable.